Hello everybody. Like everyone else on YouTube, I'm going to talk about Squid Game in the hope that it will bring more people to see videos on my channel. But I'm going to try and talk about something which I don't think anyone else has particularly thus far from what I've seen. Squid Game is the latest big thing, but it's nothing new. And I shall go on to explain exactly what I mean by that in a moment. The director and writer of Squid Game, Hwang Dong-hyuk, says that he came up with the idea 10 years ago. Well, he didn't come up with the idea exactly so much as copy it from a couple of Japanese films. Kaiju, which came out in 2009, and As the Gods Will, that was released in 2014. And I shall go on to explain a bit more in a minute. Squid Game also owes a debt to the film Battle Royale. Now I'm going to talk a bit about what I liked about Squid Game, what I didn't like about Squid Game, and why I think these films are better, but also things that I didn't like about these films too. And there are going to be some spoilers, so if you don't want to hear any spoilers, better to just not listen. Alright, so Kaiju 2009 is the name of the lead character. It's based on a manga comic book, which was later turned into a manga cartoon, and then later into a film trilogy. Part 1 in 2009, Part 2 in 2011, Part 3 in 2020. Now, the film Kaiju Part 1 sees our hero Kaiju forced to compete in these games due to being a guarantor on a loan, and the person who owes the money has disappeared, leaving him as guarantor with the burden of the debt to pay. So unlike Squid Games, he doesn't owe the debt personally, he was a guarantor for his friend. It's a little bit different, and that difference is quite important. He goes to a ship to compete in the first game, which is scissor paper stone. Now, unlike Squid Game where everyone who loses is murdered, in Kaiju everyone who loses is forced into indentured servitude as slaves to build an underground city for the rich corporation called Taiji. And he has an opportunity to get out of being a slave by competing in the most dangerous game, which is walking across a bridge between two buildings high up in the air. So Squid Game kind of copied the idea of the bridge high up, but they added the bit with the glass panes. There is money on the line, and it ends with a final game, which is a kind of card game. So it differs a bit there. So in Kaiju we only get 3 games, and it is very similar in idea to Squid Game. They changed it a little bit with the lots of people, and with people getting murdered when they lose, but it is essentially the same idea. Now we go on to As the Gods Will. Well, let's talk a bit about Kaiju 2 and 3. In Kaiju Part 1, he's playing for himself. In Kaiju Part 2, for some reason he finds himself back in the underground slave business after having been freed of it at the end of Part 1. I don't know exactly why and how he's back, but the other slaves find that their foreman, who's been gambling with them, playing dice, has been cheating, and they all get their money back, and they pool their money together to buy Kaiju 2 weeks outside of being a slave to go to the world above and try and raise enough money to pay their debts to release all of them. And he ends up trying to win from the corporation that runs a casino that has a kind of pachinko game which nobody ever wins at because it's rigged. So the first one he's playing for himself, second one he's playing for his friends, and then the third film he's playing for every citizen of Japan to try and stop the government from taking all their money. It's all quite silly. So Kaiju 2 and 3, no bearing on Squid Game, very different stories. But Part 1, very much Squid Gamey. Now let's go on to As the Gods Will, 2014, directed by Takashi Miike, who is one of Japan's most prolific directors of the recent years. And I don't always like his films, such as Visitor Q, I didn't really like. But then he has the most original mind, and things such as Dead or Alive, City of Lost Souls. The man's imagination is more than most people. If you've ever seen City of Lost Souls, you've seen the slow motion bullet time Matrix chicken, you know what I'm talking about. So Takashi Miike is a good director. He has very original thoughts and he does things that no one else would think of. And As the Gods Will is very much along those lines. So in the first 90 seconds, we slowly scroll along the floor of a school classroom to see somebody lying on the floor, and then we see the bloody stump where the head's gone. And in Squid Game they have the look left, look right game with the giant doll, exactly copied from this film, except instead of a large doll, it's a small Japanese demon idol called a Daruma, and it goes Daruma-san. And every time it turns round, if anybody moves, instead of being shot, the boys' heads explode and the girls' eyes turn red and the faces contort, and all of these red balls come out of the bottom of their skirts, probably full of their blood. It's very strange, but rather entertaining. So then, those people in each class who survive, only one can survive. The one who pushes the button on the back of the Daruma lives and everyone else dies. And each single survivor from each class are forced into the school gym, where, have you ever seen those lucky cats that move one paw like this? Well, one of those comes along out of a massive hole that opens up in the gym floor, and it starts eating people. And they have to throw the bell from round its neck through the hoop left where the bell's being removed. It's all very silly. So, whereas Squid Games is about children's games, As the Gods Will is about games that involve Japanese demons of some kind. And it does get very strange. After the first two games, the Daruma doll and the giant cat, the surviving contestants are magically transported into a giant white cube that's floating over the city. And there are more games in there, including one with a giant snowboarding polar bear, which is very poorly animated, but probably on purpose, since the rest of the CGI effects are really good. Why they chose to make it look weird like that, I don't know, but they did. And unlike Squid Games, this is about the meaning of life. All of the students were complaining about how boring their lives are, only to realize through all of the carnage that to be alive is what matters, and even though your life is boring, you're alive, and that's amazing. So it's a lot more existential than Squid Games. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it does owe a debt to Battle Royale, and I've seen people on the internet talking about Hunger Games as well. I haven't watched any of the Hunger Games films. They're all cheap Battle Royale knockoffs, and I just can't be bothered with them. They're in the basket of films that I will never watch, along with Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and Twilight, amongst others that I've just said, nah, never gonna waste time with it. Now, Battle Royale was a lot better than Squid Games in two respects, in my opinion. In Squid Games, everyone who loses gets shot. In Battle Royale, everyone has different weapons and there are many different modes of death. In Squid Games, nobody is forced to play, they all do it through greed. And they're given a chance, once they realize they could die, they're all given a chance to go home and give up, but most of them come back through sheer greed. Meanwhile, in As the Gods Will and in Battle Royale, they have no choice, they're forced into it, and that makes a very large difference. So while Squid Game did add some certain elements, It took As the Gods Will, and it took Kaiju, and it squished them together, and they added the costumes, the red uniforms and the masks. They added the big colourful sets, and they added everybody dying instead of being turned into a slave. But apart from that, it's pretty much the same. They just followed these other two films. Now, one thing that I think was very bad about Squid Game, which also I can say for As the Gods Will and Battle Royale and Kaiju, because all of these films establish lead characters at the start, you know that they're never really in any real danger because they're the lead character. They're going to make it through to the end. When you have a film or TV show such as these with a lot of different characters, I am of the opinion that there should be no lead character. Every character should be of equal importance. Or if you have too many to do that, like in Battle Royale they had 40, in Squid Games they got 400 and something, whatever it was, 461 I think it was. But you need to have at least a group of main characters who are each of equal import, who you spend the same amount of time with the story of each, and through doing this you don't know who's going to win. Whereas in Squid Game they spent a good 30 minutes trying to make us feel sorry for this guy, and we know that he's the lead character, we know that he's not going to die, he's going to make it through to the last game. It's all a bit silly really. So they do this in every film. Like Kaiju, you know he's the main character, he's going to make it through. Battle Royale, you got the boy and the good girl who the teacher likes, and you know they're going to make it through to the end. As the Gods Will, you got the boy and the girl who are the first two survivors who the film focuses on, and you know that they're going to survive through to the end. So I am of the opinion that that's really not the right way to do it. And one of my main criticisms about Squid Games, well, two big criticisms, there were a lot of subplots that led to nothing, like the policeman story which just ended with him disappearing and no police come to raid the island at all. And also Squid Games was far too long. They had enough material to make a 2-3 hour film TV show that was good, and they tried to stretch it out and stretch it out and stretch it out. In my opinion, almost the whole of the 9th episode was completely superfluous and unnecessary. I think if they'd done it all in 4 or 5 episodes, it would have been a lot better if they cut all the unnecessary stuff out of it. Also, the games in Squid Game were not particularly interesting or suspenseful, in my opinion. I mean, the marbles game was so boring to watch. I got really bored with some sections of that series. And I think the game should have been better. I think the punishment should have been better. In As the Gods Will, every game people die in different ways. I won't explain anymore, but it's more interesting. You don't know what's going to happen. So Squid Games was rather predictable, and it was too long. They stretched out too much. And I also didn't really feel any emotion towards the lead character. They tried to make us feel sorry for him because he's got all of this debt and because of his daughter who's been taken away. But he was there because of greed, he was there because of his own gambling habit, he was there because he was a bad person. Whereas in Kaiju, it's not his fault. He signed a guarantor for his friend, and his friend let him down and put him in the position where he was forced into it. So to be forced to play is very different to choosing to play. So I'm of the opinion, frankly speaking, that if you haven't seen Squid Game yet, you'd be much better off watching Battle Royale, Kaiju, and As the Gods Will. They are all better than Squid Game, they're more entertaining, they're better made, they're less time consuming, and I think you'll just get more out of watching them personally. I only watched Squid Game because of all the hype. If I hadn't heard all of this stuff about it, everybody talking about it, I probably would never have bothered. And I must admit, the first episode was kind of alright. The look left, look right, I thought was kind of good. But then it went downhill from there. My interest waned. I particularly hated when they brought in the VIPs in episode 7 or 8, whichever it was. I didn't like anything with the VIPs. It was dumb. So anyway, I think that's about all I have to say. I'm sorry it's a little bit rambly, but you really should consider watching these Japanese films instead of, or as well as, Squid Game. If you've already seen Squid Game and you like it, give these Japanese films a try. You might like them too. They're all available on the internet quite easily. Battle Royale is one of the best films ever made. Kaiju, I give maybe 6 out of 10. It's not great, but it's okay. As the Gods Will was one of the most entertaining films I've seen in a very long time. I give that a solid 8 out of 10. Battle Royale is probably a 9 out of 10, but I didn't like the way it ended particularly, and like I said, they made the 2 lead characters at the start, which I think was a mistake. But aside from that, it was almost a perfect film. It's really good. Anyway, please like and subscribe. I think that's all for now. Have a nice day, everyone. See you next time. Goodbye.